We're on. There we are. We're good. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for coming. It's awesome to be back at NDC again. My name is Scott. I'm sure you know me. You can find loads of information about the things I'm going to talk about today on my blog. Follow me on the Twitters if you want kind of more real-time information. And it's kind of interesting because I published a blog just last night, actually, about some of the changes that are happening in the industry with encryption on the web right now. So we've just seen another significant change in Chrome browser, and we're going to see the same change in March in Firefox, and by then the rest of the mainstream browsers as well. So it's kind of interesting to be talking about this whilst I'm blogging about actual industry events at the same time. So the talk of the title, 25 years of SSL, secure-ish sockets layer. So SSL, for those not familiar, used to be the encryption protocol that gives us the S in HTTPS, of course. Nowadays, we use TLS, Transport Layer Security, the new version of the protocol. However, despite the fact that we don't really use SSL, this kind of term has stuck around because it was in place for so long. So this is kind of a talk of two halves. In the first half of the talk, I want to look at the history of how we got here, because we've had encryption on the web officially since 1994. That's when we got our first real encryption protocol that, people like you and I and average people on the internet will use to protect them online. But in those last 25 years, just over 25 years now, an awful lot has changed. So we're going to look at the history of how we got from where we were to where we are, the things that have changed along the way. And then in the second half of the talk, I'm going to look at the things that have gone wrong and the things that we need to improve going forwards as well. Now, I know that I'm in Norway, and this, I'm hoping this kind of demo goes well. What I want you to do is when you see the next slide, I want you to say the first word that you think of. What does this image mean to you? What do you think of when you see this? Security. Any advances? Browsers, safety, extended validation, green. Authenticated. Okay, that's quite a technical term to get from a picture of a green handbag. I mean, I don't know how you got that. But that's a pretty good one. I'll take that. And I put this joke in here because I actually saw a tweet from someone that I follow online, Adrienne Portofel, and if you don't follow her, you absolutely should. Super technical, awesome person, works on the Chrome security side of things, and she sent this tweet, and I'm still kind of referring to this. What you have to realize, right, is this was sent back in 2015. So, she sent this tweet, and I looked at it, and it's just always kind of sat in the back of my mind on how we as technical people can see this thing and be like, well, duh, this is a padlock, like, obviously. But a normal user that doesn't have any of the kind of background or experience in this industry that we have, and we shouldn't expect these average people to have some kind of technical knowledge, they can look at this and be like, well, this is like a red purse, or we call it a handbag in the UK. And they're absolutely right. And I thought, well, could you could look at this with no prior background or experience and maybe arrive at this conclusion, but have we done anything else along these lines of kind of mistaking this? So I went looking around a few different websites to see, because there was one more thing that I'd thought of, and it didn't take me very long to find a really big prominent example of where we kind of get this, not terminology, but iconology, I guess, mixed up. Have a look at the Apple website. So you can go see this right now. And I was like, okay, yep, so we got our nice little padlock up there. Oh, why is it in the top right? It's like, these two things do look really similar. If I just zoom in on the padlock for you, the user's not going to be looking at this so closely, right, to see exactly the difference between these. But I was like, oh, yeah, kind of like shopping bag, shopping cart, padlock. We do see lots of websites as well putting an actual image of the padlock on the site to imply, like, hey, our website's secure. Look, we have a big padlock JPEG in the middle of the screen. And it's like, how is the user supposed to know the difference between these padlocks, shopping bags, purses, whatever they may be? So we're going to pick up on this thread again later in the talk, because I think this is something that we've finally, in the last probably 12 months, really started to learn our lesson on. But first of all, how have we got here? How did we get to this kind of point in time? And of course, I'm going to be talking about this kind of green purse, the proper one, the HTTPS padlock in the browser. Now, we have to go back quite a long way in order to understand when encryption started on the web. Does everybody remember these? Did anyone have one of these? Like the first generation iPod. Can anyone tell me what year this came out? 2003, very close. It was 2001. This was a very, very long time ago. We actually have to go back further than this. We have to go back further than the original Xbox console. We have to go further back than the creation of QR codes. Can anyone remember when they'd never seen a QR code in their life, when they didn't exist? This is a long time ago. So we have to go back out of the 2000s. We have to go back into the 90s. We have to go back to a time when your phone looked like this. This is the IBM Simon, and this came out in 1994, the same year that the first encryption protocol on the web was released. And it was also the same year when we opened the Channel Tunnel in the UK. So this was like, the Channel Tunnel's been there forever. Depending on your perspective, this is the kind of interesting thing about encryption. It's either a really long time or before some of you were born, I hate you. So the problem with this, everyone's looking at the Channel Tunnel and the security people like, oh my God, a hole in our perimeter security. Don't worry, Brexit is coming. It's like 1 week away. We're going to fix the Channel Tunnel. Like there will be no more issues. Like we're going to fix this right up. But talking about improving our security further, we do have to go back quite a long way. When our web browsers look like this, this is what web browsers look like when we got our first encryption protocol on the web. Now, some of you may remember browsers looking like this. I don't. And this is Netscape version 1.0. And this was the first release of a browser that had encryption, had HTTPS built into it. And it's just like, wow, really? Encryption was the thing that we needed to fix in this? Like, this is, I kind of look at this and think, yeah, the internet actually used to look like this. So this is like way back in 1994 now, the start of our timeline when we're going to look at this. And SSL, the secure sockets layer, the protocol, was actually created by engineers working at Netscape. They were the vendor that was pushing this forwards. And the first ideas and the requirement for this encryption was coming from the ideas of e-commerce. Right? It was like, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if we could go to a website, type in a credit card number, and then they'd send you something. And it was like, wow, that'd be really good. You could buy things over the internet, but we can't just send our credit card details over the network, because even back then it was understood the risks of sending sensitive data like that. So this was really kind of the start of this snowball effect of the requirement of encryption. And you may never have actually seen or heard of this particular version of the protocol. Many people may be familiar with SSLs like version 3, maybe 2 going back into the 90s. But SSL version 1 was never actually standardized and used, because their first attempt at creating an encryption protocol, they sit down, they write the specification, they're like, yeah, this is a really good idea. We're thinking of releasing this. And then they went and showed it to someone else. It was a meeting at MIT between quite a few different technical people. And they stood there with their slide deck talking about SSL version 1. And 12 minutes into this presentation, someone was like, okay, I've broken it. They'd broken the encryption protocol in the meeting where they were announcing the encryption protocol. So it's like, okay, screw up this piece of paper and toss that away. SSL version 1 is no good, which is why you've probably never heard of it. It was never really a formal standard thing. They went away, they went back to the drawing board, and of course they came back with something that you may be familiar with, which is SSL version 2. This was the second attempt at getting this right, and it actually stood up to quite a little bit of scrutiny and was deployed and used as the first protocol, even though it's version 2. Now, the problem with this was version 2 was the first one that went out and got some public scrutiny. Version 1 was kind of scrutinized internally and failed very quickly. Version 2 went through that same limited kind of scrutiny and was then published and released. And it managed to last a whole 3 months out in the public domain. And 3 months later, it was like, okay, the wider industry, we've broken SSL v2. And it's like, oh crap, that didn't last too long. So literally less than a year later, in 1995, Netscape again had to come back and release version SSL v3 to fix the issues that were found in v2. So we were literally not even 1 year later, and we were already on to version 3 of this protocol. But then around about this time, something interesting happened. Because when Netscape released SSL version 3 to fix the issues in v2, another organization came along, and they had a slightly different idea about this. Now, Microsoft liked the idea of encryption on the web, like many people in the industry at the time, but they thought, we're not going to follow Netscape. We're not going to use their protocol, right? Because remember, Netscape created SSL. What were Netscape and Microsoft fighting about at this point in time? Right, late 90s, Internet Explorer, Navigator, the browser wars. So these kinds of organizations are like arch rivals at this point. And Netscape created SSL, and Microsoft's like, no, screw this. We're going to make our own thing called Private Communications Technology, version 1. Now, PCT, this was kind of interesting. So Netscape took v2 and patched it up to v3. Microsoft took v2 and patched it up to PCT v1. So they literally just took SSL v2, did their own fixes that they thought were the best things. And of course, this was only supported in like Internet Explorer and IIS. Now, this wasn't really good for the ecosystem. This isn't good for the community because now we have this divergence in technologies. We're going to have arguments about support and cross-compatibility and all of these things. And this was a bit like, this is not really the direction that we want things to go. We don't want to fork in the road so soon. But this is what happened. So SSL version 3, released in 95, this was only actually broken in 2015, quite recently. So SSL version 3 did super, super well in terms of how long it lasted. But fast forward a few more years, coming up to the new millennium, and we make it to 1999. And again, Netscape wants to release some new upgrades to SSL version 3. And they actually proposed a minor patch. So it's only going to go to version 3.1. And again, none of you may have heard of this, and I'll explain why in just a minute. So Netscape are like, yeah, we're going to patch it up. We're going to go to 3.1, fix a couple of security things, add some new little bits. It's not going to be a huge big deal. However, Microsoft not doing so well with PCT at this time, only in Internet Explorer and IIS. They were like, hey, look, the rest of the industry agrees, like, we should bring these two things back together. We don't want to continue this divergence of encryption protocols. We want to like bring them back together and have one unified approach on this. So Microsoft were like, okay, like we can see a way to do this. We can get on board with this. What we're going to do is we're going to hand the standardization of the protocol away from Netscape that created it to an independent body, the IETF. And it's like, okay, so what we'll do is we'll take it out of Netscape's hands, we'll take it out of Microsoft's hands, we'll hand it over to this body, and then they can kind of like independently look after this standard from now on. And this is a great idea. This is exactly what we want to happen as an industry, as an ecosystem. But Microsoft had one kind of tiny little requirement, one little caveat. And they were like, look, if we take SSL version 3.1, Netscape's next iteration on the protocol, and then the IETF just take that and put the stamp on it and say, good, standard, released, it looks like the IETF are approving Netscape's work. And remember, Microsoft kind of don't like Netscape at this point in time. So Microsoft said, look, we'll hand this over to the IETF and we'll continue with your version under the agreement that you change the name. So they said you have to change the name from the secure sockets layer to transport layer security. And this is what happened in 1999. This is when we got TLS version 1.0. And you can go and read, of course, all the documents and emails around this time and why this happened, or you can also go and look at the actual RFC itself. This is the actual standard that the IETF published for TLS version 1.0, which you can see here. But the interesting thing is, I've zoomed into a little part of the document here. If you take a look at the actual versioning field, they were like, well, if we change the versioning field, software might get upset and it might break, it could cause incompatibility. So they're like, you know what, we'll just write TLS at the top of the page, but we'll still keep the underlying version field as 3.1. So even to this day now, like you can literally see this was just a name change at the top of the document. It says in there, like version 1.0 and SSL 3 are very similar. Thus supporting both is easy because they were the same thing. So today, if you get a tool like Wireshark and you're doing traffic analysis, if you start to look at packets on the wire and you're like, why does this say like version 3.1 or 3.2 as we go forwards? And it's because they kept the underlying version number the same and quite literally just renamed it so that Microsoft would agree. So this is why the protocol name changed. Many people look at this and think, you know, this was 1999, right before the new millennium. We're like, yeah, brand new protocol, you know, like everything's awesome. And it's like, no, we literally just rubbed out SSL and wrote TLS. Like this is all that changed. So the next iteration that we got came a few years later in 2006. And as encryption was growing and growing on the web, the next version, of course, now under the care of the IETF, not Netscape or Microsoft or anyone, they released a minor kind of update, TLS version 1.1. In many ways, this was kind of boring in the regard that it only brought some security fixes. It removed a couple of broken things, fixed up a couple of others. And that's a really important point that we're going to pick back up on later, because this is all TLS version 1.1 did. It was just kind of, you know, fix up a couple of security issues. But then things really kind of changed. If we fast forward just kind of a couple more years, and what we're going to take a look at is the data for the adoption of these different versions so far. So right now, the one that I'm really interested in is the one that I've just talked about. This graph shows the highest supported protocol version for the largest number of websites on the internet. So we're talking like 150,000, like the top biggest websites in the world. So the blue line for the people at the back, the blue line kind of skyrocketing up is TLS 1.2. We'll come on to that in a minute. But right now, what I want to talk about is the orange line. Can everyone see the orange line? Yep, right? Nope. The orange line is the one that's just really flat across the bottom, because they came along and they're like, ta-da, like brand new version of the protocol, TLS 1.1, flat line. Like no one at any point in history has deployed this with any kind of real aggression. It was just literally like, nope, we don't kind of care about this apparently. And we're going to keep coming back to this graph because I want to talk about the next protocol version. Came out just a couple of years later, 2008. This was really significant. Again, still under the IETF. This was TLS version 1.2. Now, TLS version 1.2 came out, and again, there were security fixes. We added some new security features, removed some old broken things, but TLS version 1.2 also brought some incredibly significant performance advantages. It made the use of encryption significantly faster, to the point where you could actually notice how much faster your website would load when using these new features in TLS 1.2. If you're interested in those, it was session resumption. So we have session IDs, session tickets. They allow you to cut down the amount of time to establish the connection. If you can make the connection faster, you can load the site faster. So now, if we go back to this graph again and kind of bear that piece of information in mind, TLS 1.1 didn't kind of really do anything that people were interested in. TLS 1.2 did. And look at the adoption line for TLS 1.2. It's the blue one. It's like whoosh, straight up. And everyone's like, yeah, we can go faster. We can have more performance. And this line, when I look at this kind of always really reminds me of how Apple deal with iOS updates nowadays. And they used to talk about the security patches and fixes and all of these things. And then all of a sudden, one day, they just started talking about emojis. They didn't notice that. It's like, install the new Apple update. We've got 5 new emojis. And everyone will immediately get out their iPhone and be like, yeah, emojis, right? If it's like, yeah, there's a critical security update, like tumbleweeds. Nobody wants to go and install the update. And it kind of reminds me of this, where it shows like a level of maturity and understanding that you can't really get people to care enough about the security stuff. So if you just like hide the security stuff underneath a great performance boost, everybody will chase the performance boost and get the security updates at the same time. So the adoption of TLS 1.2, you can see like the line says everything. This was super, super significant. And this was kind of a lesson learned really. But the one thing that I want to do is overlay onto that graph the lowest protocol version supported as well. So again, we can still see, you know, like people are chasing this TLS 1.2 line and deploying it. But looking at the other versions supported as well, what we can see is that we kind of suck at, we add the new ones, which is great, but we don't drop off the old ones. We kind of have these long tails of support of old protocol versions. The most notable one here is probably the SSL version 3 line, which is this kind of purpley one just there. Now, you can see the support for SSL version 3 was basically 100% until some incident happened in 2015, and then it just kind of fell off the edge of the cliff. Does anyone know what happened in 2015? Very close. That was 2014. That was a great guess. Very close. Again, correct year. It was Poodle. So there was an attack called Poodle in 2015 that you may have heard of in kind of like the tech news. And it basically broke SSL version 3. And it was like, right, okay, we've been hanging on to this thing literally forever, and now it's broken in production, and everybody needs to come in on Sunday and patch their servers to turn this thing off because it's not secure anymore. What we need to see is this kind of steep decline here just tail off over time. And we're going through this process right now at the minute. So the last one to look at, coming forward to 2018, just a couple of years ago, after like 5 years of work, the IETF finally came through on the latest version of the standard, which is TLS version 1.3. And again, absolutely packed with new security features, the removal of old broken security constructs, but some huge performance advantages as well. It was like the same thing they learn in TLS version 1.3. I don't often see people talking about the new security features of 1.3. I see them talking about the new performance features because that's really what people are incentivized to do. So again, last time, if we just take a quick look at this graph, you'll have noticed right down here is TLSV 1.3. The reason the line starts there, of course, is that was when it was released and standardized. You can see this now explains a little bit of a dip in TLS 1.2 because that's people switching their highest protocol version. And what we want to see is we want to see the continued increase of this line, but we also need to see more of this. Look at the TLS 1.0 line. Again, seeing this nice tail off. We don't want to have this legacy of the web kept around forever. We want to keep budging people up to the newest versions of protocols. So that's how we got from 1994 until the present day in terms of the actual encryption standards. And we've seen here the rate of adoption of the different protocol versions, but what about the breadth of adoption across the web? So if we take a look at data, which, oh, is that a question? Yeah. Go ahead. Oh, this one? So do you mean this little tick here? And the corresponding one here? I don't know. I have actually tried to figure this out because it's a very odd line. So I think it's small enough. Remember, this is the percentage of sites that use TLS. So I think if a large provider was to perhaps change their configuration, if they were a significant enough portion of these 150,000 websites, perhaps they could make this impact. They'd have to be a very big provider. But the truth is, I don't know. I have tried to figure this out because it does look very strange. So no, that's a really good question. If you can figure it out, let me know, tweet me. So if we kind of take a look at the data from organizations that make this available now, this comes from the Google Transparency Report. And this is the percentage of traffic across Google that is now properly encrypted. So, bearing in mind, Google's got like search, advertising, YouTube, and all kinds of different stuff. This is just like the overview of all of those different things. Now, bearing in mind, this graph comes up to 2019. I kind of grabbed the latest data I could. The other common problem that we see is that the data doesn't really go back very far. Organizations haven't cared about encryption at this level for a very long time. So generally speaking, it's kind of hard to go further back than like 2013, 14 and have reliable data. So when you look at any data like this is generally why we only see it kind of going back 5 or 6 years nowadays. If we take a look at this and split this out and look at Google's different traffic across different areas of their business, then we also see some really interesting trends. Now, first of all, look at the green line across the top. That's Gmail, and Google Drive is the yellow one that you just can't see. It's like, yeah, we've had encryption nailed here for like as long as data goes back. But the more interesting ones are things like this blue one, advertising. This was actually a really huge problem for the web, and especially a lot of media organizations, because if you want to take your website and flick it over to HTTPS, everything on your website has to be HTTPS. Otherwise, we end up with a problem called mixed content. Now, given that Google runs one of the largest advertising platforms online, if their advertising traffic is all served over HTTP, it would prevent you from changing your website over to HTTPS. So, this really steep incline in the percentage of advertising traffic that was secure was really important because it removed barriers to other websites adopting encryption. And all of these lines we can see are trending correctly in the right direction. They're trending upwards. Now, if we come away from Google and start to look at kind of different platforms again, so this is the traffic coming out of Windows, Android, Chrome, Linux, and Mac devices. Again, the trend is moving in the correct direction, but the data only goes back as far as 2015 in this case. But we are seeing a rapid increase in the percentage of traffic that is encrypted. Take a look at the next piece of data here. This is data from Mozilla that comes from Firefox. What percentage of page loads are encrypted in Firefox browser? So every single time a page loads, Firefox takes a note of whether it was HTTP or HTTPS. Again, 2014 we can go back to here, but we can see this upward trend in the data. Over time, more and more of the page loads in the browser are taking place over HTTPS. I don't know if it's just me, but I see almost a small plateau here. Like we've had this nice incline, and if we get a lot of the graphs and come forward to kind of 2020, what we're seeing is they're almost starting to level out. And this is a little bit concerning because I was hoping these graphs would continue increasing at quite a steady rate, but I do believe across different data sources, we are now starting to see that plateau, and this is probably where the legacy of the web is going to come back and kind of bite us in the ass. But this is all the people running Windows XP. Now, the problem is, if we keep looking at the data, this is from the Internet Archive. Again, the percentage of secure HTTPS requests is going up and up over time. So the one thing that I wanted to do to this was also add my own data. For those of you that don't know, I run another project called crawler.ninja. I have a little fleet of crawlers, and they crawl the top 1 million websites in the world every day. I gather loads of different pieces of telemetry about them, their security, and all of these kinds of things. And one of them is the website secure? Is it redirecting to HTTPS? Are they properly using HTTPS? And I publish this data every day, so you can just go grab it from the website. Now, what I do every 6 months is I do a kind of state of the internet report, I guess you could call it. What's like changed in the last 6 months? And I grabbed this graph from my last report, which was in September 2019. Now, this is going all the way back to 2015 when my data started. This is basically the number of sites in the top 1 million that are using encryption. And as you can see, when we go up through the dates every 6 months, we're taking this significant step up and up and up. More and more sites are actively redirecting their users to HTTPS and forcing that secure connection. So I guess the point is, no matter where you go, which organizations, data that you look at, Mozilla, Firefox, Google with their data, even my own independent data, we're all seeing the same consistent trend in this nice, steady incline in the adoption of encryption on the web. So if I take all of this data and I kind of aggregate it into my own graph, where I have multiple different data sources that agree with each other, I can draw this graph. Because realistically, I can only find data that goes back to about 2013, where I've got multiple independent sources that I can compare to each other. So from the present day, I can go back about this far. And the thing that really kind of irks me with this graph is, like, what does it look like on that left side? Did we see this explosive growth of encryption in 2013 from nothing to everything? I don't know. We don't have the data that goes that far back. But maybe we can, take a rough guess. Does it look like this? Is it a much more recent thing? Or does it look like this? Have we just seen this very, very steady incline since 1994? And the truth is, I guess maybe we'll never know, because I can't find enough reliable data sources to go this far back. But no matter how we draw that line on the left side, I think we can probably all agree that this part on the right side is still pretty phenomenal. We've done most of the work in the last 5 or 6 years. We've made so much progress, and we need to keep that going, and we need to keep pushing it. But along the way, there have been bumps in the road. I can say, with some certainty, we've had to fix mistakes from the past. Now, one thing with a rapid change in technology like this huge, just high-speed adoption of encryption on the web, with any change comes confusion. With any change comes people looking to abuse that change or leverage that change to their advantage. And the adoption of encryption on the web has been no exception to that rule, because we've had things like this. Now, Let's Encrypt and Komodo, if you don't know of them, they're two certificate authorities that issue certificates to websites. If you want HTTPS, you have to go and usually buy a certificate from a CA. Now, Netcraft is a really good statistics company. They have some great articles and some great data sets. And what they said when they published this was phishing websites are now actually switching over to encryption as well. So what we're seeing on the internet was not just our websites, like my website, your website, and e-commerce websites and things like that. People that run phishing websites that are trying to scam people out of money or email addresses or passwords or whatever it might be, they're also going and taking the time and the effort to deploy HTTPS onto their website. And this kind of sounds interesting. It's like, well, they're like criminals and thieves and they're stealing stuff. Why do they care about protecting your data with HTTPS and encrypting it? And it was because, if you look at the data, we see this trend in the last few years. It was because it was beneficial to them, right? Like, no matter which way we look at this, the people running these phishing websites, getting certificates from Let's Encrypt and Komodo and other CAs as well, it had to have benefited them in some way. They wouldn't go through the effort of deploying encryption on their website unless they got something in return for it. Take a look at this video.
Supercon! Defender of the Galaxy! Complete with powerful disc cannon! Realistic sounding jetpack!
Defender of the... Oh, you know what? I can't do this. It's all rubbish. It's a scam. If you order me, you'll get nothing. Look, in there, you need a padlock when you pay for stuff. If there isn't one, the website could be fake. Oh, look at that.
Defeat online fraudsters this Christmas!
Which part of that do I have issue with? Right? They said if the website doesn't have a padlock, it could be a fake. Now, that implies that if the website does have a padlock, then it's not a fake. And you have to remember that Barclays is a pretty big bank, right? Like one of the top 3 banks in the UK or something like that. Proper high street, recognized brand, no matter where you go, I'm sure, in many parts of the world. And they put this onto the television on the run-up to Christmas in the UK, on primetime UK television. So this wasn't some like small online campaign. This was literally like you were sat down watching your television in the evening and you would see this thing over and over again. And the implication, if it doesn't have a padlock, it could be a fake. Tells people, well, if it has a padlock, then it's not a fake. And this is exactly the problem, and this is exactly why phishing websites and scam websites were starting to switch to encryption, because there was a huge misunderstanding around what that padlock in the browser meant. If you are not a technical expert, which the vast majority of people aren't and shouldn't have to be, then you're looking at this padlock and thinking, oh, well, yeah, I can go and type my credit card into this website because it's okay. I can type in my email address and my password. And this is what the fraudsters and the scammers and the phishers were leveraging. They were using this misunderstanding around the connection security indicator and thinking that it implied something about the security of the site. Now, you can send your credit card details to fraudsters securely, right? Like, it's not going to stop them from using it to do bad things. Nobody else can use it other than the fraudsters. So, I mean, I guess it's better to lose your credit card over HTTPS than HTTP, but it's not going to stop bad things happening to you. So this is actually kind of interesting because we have the Advertising Standards Agency in the UK, the ASA, and there was actually a formal complaint process about this. Like, enough people complain to the ASA to say, look, like, you know, this TV advert that has been released is actually misleading. So if I just get some snippets from the report here for us to look at, the ASA said 15 complainants challenged whether the ad misleadingly implied that website URLs with green padlocks were guaranteed to be safe. And I think that's fair. I do think that they misleadingly implied that. So this was the complaint that was sent to the ASA, and they had enough complaints of the similar nature that they actually investigated this, and they came back with an upheld complaint. They said, yes, we agree with the complainants, this was misleading, and the ASA considered that consumers were generally unlikely to have a detailed understanding of the website padlock symbol. Would we agree that that is a fair statement to make? I don't think if we went out into Oslo now and stopped people with like a survey board and we were like, what does this green padlock thing mean? So I think that this is reasonable. I think that this is fair to say. Should we expect consumers to have technical knowledge? And it turns out, well, they don't, so maybe we should stop expecting them to. If we take a look at this as well, they said that the ad must not appear again in the form complained of. So they had to they cut out the whole section in the middle about like the padlock and things like that, and then they just reran a shorter version of the advert. But it says the website padlock security measure did not guarantee safety. This was the key thing that came from the ASA for me. Just because a website has a padlock, it does not mean the website is safe, which is absolutely 100% true. And I'm sure as technical security people, we can all sit here and say, well, yeah, like the padlock means the connection is encrypted. You could be having an encrypted conversation with the devil. It doesn't make the devil a good person. It just means that you're encrypted between you and the devil. So this was like a really big turning point. And for years and years and years, I'm sure, again, everyone can agree here, we've seen these efforts to kind of stop people thinking the padlock means something. It's like, we've had these user education kind of, messages that go out saying, just because there's a green padlock doesn't mean it's okay. Always check the domain name, or, some variation of that message where we've been trying to break this opinion of people that padlocks mean safe, padlocks mean secure, padlocks mean trust. Padlocks just mean encryption, and that's all that they mean. So this has been kind of interesting for me because we've been doing this for a very, very long time. We've been teaching people that they actually mean something more than they do. Now, if we be completely fair, I can see where the kind of foundations of this argument came from. If you go back all the way to the late 90s and the early 2000s, there was only like 10 websites that had a padlock, and it was like PayPal, Amazon, Google, and something else. So there was a reasonable assertion that if you wanted to make sure you were on the legitimate Google, you could just check for a padlock because they were the only people that could afford to do it and had the technical capabilities. And maybe that's where the foundation of this misunderstanding came from. But as encryption has just exploded across the web, that incorrect kind of message has become dangerous now. So if we have a look around, it's not hard to find, like I've literally got these in the last couple of weeks. So these are still current present messages saying, what does the padlock symbol in the corner of my screen mean? United Utilities provide the water to my house. So they're our water utility provider. And it's like, the padlock symbol means the web page you are visiting is secure. And it doesn't mean the page is secure because the page could have bad stuff on it. It means the connection is secure. But again, it's teaching people, like if you go to a page and there's a padlock, it means that this page is safe, it's secure. And it's really easy to find examples of this. Like I just literally went onto Google and searched for padlock secure and read everyone's websites, and they're all over the place. So we have seen campaigns to try and stop this. Get Safe Online is a really good one for, kind of online safety information like this. And, HTTPS in the padlock, is it safe or not? Safe is the wrong word. We shouldn't even be using the word safe in relation to padlocks and encryption online. So this is kind of a tough one. And I think the one thing that I have seen recently that really finally might actually break this dangerous message is how we're actually treating the UI. Now, does everybody know what this is? Check engine light, fantastic. This usually means that your wallet is about to get a pounding because you've got into your car and you've turned your car on and this yellow light comes on. When you see this, do you know that you need to do something? You know that you need to pay attention to this. You know that you need to respond or react to this. You may not even be able to drive your car. There is a problem. And for me, this is the same kind of approach that we now need to take with browsers. Does anyone here have a light in their car that tells them everything is okay? Like a little green tick? Smiley face? No? It's the absence of this indicator that tells you everything is okay. But you don't have like a green smiley face or a green tick. And this is kind of, to me, like what the padlock has become in the browser. It's like a, yeah, everything is okay message, like everything is safe, everything is good, but it's not. And what we're starting to see is this change in stance of the browsers around this green padlock secure positive UI. It's a very similar principle in that we're starting to see the browser vendors come away from this positive treatment for HTTPS and instead introduce warnings where they're necessary, because we all understand what warnings are. Now, the browsers, this is a very significant change because we're completely flipping the model of the UI upside down. So they've done this very progressively and very steadily. The first change that we saw came a couple of, 1.5, 2 years ago in Chrome. Now, the interesting thing for me is if you went to a HTTP page, it would just be the normal plain UI. No warnings, no errors, no anything. This is just the standard UI. And what they did, they introduced this new message, this new not secure indicator here. Now, this is technically accurate, right? Is the connection to this website secure? No, it's not secure because it's HTTP. But the really weird thing for me on top of this is like, yes, we've got this new information and we're starting to feed in these negative messages. Has anyone ever been to a HTTPS website and there's been some kind of misconfiguration or the certificate's expired or something bad has happened? You get like that big, full red, scary warning. Broken HTTPS and HTTP are the same security state. There is no security. Now, one of them gets big, red, scary warnings, and the other one gets nothing. But they're both equal. They're both zero security. And I was thought that was really interesting and really weird. So we're starting to see the flipping of this model now. What they're doing is they're introducing these kinds of warnings onto HTTP websites, and they're also starting to peel back the secure indicators. If I just like quickly jump out and show you, for example, now I'm running, if any of you have Chromium on your devices, let me just clone this up there for you. So if any of you are running Chromium on your devices, you can go and test this now. So if we take a look at my website, just basic DV certificate, wow, it's kind of super small, but you get the picture, right? The green has gone. There's no green up there in the address bar anymore. It doesn't say secure. Do you remember in Chrome when it used to say secure next to the address bar as well? It doesn't say secure anymore. So they've taken away the green, they've taken away the secure on a secure site. And eventually what they're going to do is take away the padlock and maybe even HTTPS as well and end up somewhere like Safari does now. If you use Safari on iOS, you know, it just says the domain name. There is no padlock, there is no HTTPS or anything else, because these are all the things that misled the user into thinking something like safety, trust, rather than encryption. And then if we go to a HTTP website, take a look at this now. Now I'm running a flag on Chromium which shows me what they're going to do in a little bit of the future. All of you will have a gray not secure indicator up here, but what they're going to do, that gray not secure indicator we just looked at, is they're going to turn it red like this. Now, if you go to this website, people are more likely to understand and cannot misinterpret this. If it says the connection is secure, there is something wrong here, this is not safe. And by taking away those positive indicators here, let's say I had like a fake PayPal login form, there is less to misinterpret here. So rather than keep trying to educate users and teach them things that, you know, let's be completely honest, they don't want to know about. You know, if you take your car to the garage and because you've got the check engine light and the mechanic wants to spend 1 hour talking to you about the gearbox, you're like, dude, I don't care, just like fix the car, right? It's the same things with users and browsers. They're like, security person, shut up. I just want to use the internet. Like, I don't want a lesson on how to understand encrypted connections. So I like this model. I like the fact that we're changing this around. And what we're doing is like we're pulling all of the green away and adding the red. And right now we're at the kind of halfway point. We're pretty much 50% of the way through that process. So we've lost the green, we've lost the secure, we've got a couple of HTTP warnings, and we just need to tip the scale fully the other way now. Because what we need to do really, and I kind of, I heard an interview kind of more recently that really kind of was interesting. And I'll show you this now. So this is also Firefox. Firefox Nightly are also doing the same thing, like I mentioned. But take a look at this. I'm a bit of a space geek. I love like watching all of the SpaceX launches. Like they're blasting, these things are like a 30-story building tall, and they're blasting this stuff into orbit, flying it around a little bit, and then coming and landing it in the middle of a bullseye, which I just think is absolutely fascinating. And this was the first time that they ever landed 2 of their boosters side by side. Did anyone watch this? This was just like phenomenally amazing, right? Everyone was losing their marbles. And like, you know, you cannot, like a single human being is kind of like 2 pixels big here. This is how massive these things are. And this, for me, will just never be uninteresting. It will never be boring. But I saw an interview with Elon Musk, and he said, we want this to be boring. We want our takeoffs and our landings to be boring. And I was like, this is kind of odd. Like, this will never be boring. He's like, but I want to do it so frequently and so reliably and so uninterestingly that people are like, SpaceX just blasted another rocket into space and landed it. Like, psh, seen that 100 times. It's boring. It's not interesting. And I was kind of like, this is what we need for encryption. Right? Encryption needs to be so prevalent, so common, so widely used, and so much inside everything that you do that we don't need to talk about it anymore. We keep talking about padlocks. Like VPN apps at the minute seem to be this huge big thing where users are worrying about their privacy and security. Get a VPN app, encrypt your connection. You're in the Wi-Fi of the hotel. Oh my God, you're going to lose all of your stuff. Get a VPN app and protect yourself with more encryption. If everything that we did just had encryption so deeply ingrained into it that we didn't even need to talk about it, wouldn't that be better? So what we need to do is have more encryption. But then I tell people this, and this is what they say to me. I'm like, you should encrypt all of your things. And they're like, Scott, I don't have anything to hide. Who here has heard some similar argument to this? Right? It's like, okay, everybody. So this is a really common thing. What I usually do to them is like, someone says that to me. I'm like, okay, just give me your phone and unlock it. I want to look through your pictures. What about you? Can I read your messages? All right, and it's very easy to kind of flip this back around on them. And I'm like, well, you haven't got anything to hide, so what are you worried about? Let me look through your pictures. And then people are very quickly understand the need for privacy and don't want other people looking at their stuff. And privacy, in fact, is actually a fundamental human right. This is Article 12 of the Human Rights here. Like you can see, it's literally no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy. And having secure encrypted communications online allows us to have privacy. Right? I might only be sending a message to my wife about what I'm going to buy from the shops on the way home. But I don't care. That's no one else's damn business. And I want to have this security, this privacy of my communications. Another really good way of that I found of kind of flipping this around to people, because it is a really common thing that I come across. It's like, you want all this encryption, you must be a criminal. I don't understand where this comes from. And I'm like, but the same person will say something like this. It's like, I don't want a microphone in my house listening to all my stuff. And I'm like, well, what are you afraid of? You have nothing to hide, right? Are you a criminal? Are you talking about criminal things? Like, you should have a microphone in every house, every room in every house. Why not? So it's really easy to kind of flip this around because everybody does understand their desire and their requirement for privacy. I just don't think that they have kind of put the pieces together. And these two ways of flipping this around in these arguments is very good at getting people to realize that they actually really do care about privacy. They just don't realize it. Because if we don't, we have people like this, right? This is a terrifying quote that somebody pointed me to. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. And this was from like Joseph Goebbels. I'm probably pronouncing his German name wrong, but he was the Nazi minister of public enlightenment and propaganda. And the thing that he was going for here was like the state should know everything about you. Everything about you. Because if you don't have anything to hide, then you should have nothing to fear from the state. And I'm like, if this does just not terrify the crap out of you, this idea, this concept, then nothing I can say here will ever help you. So this is kind of the point. It's not about having something to hide, to need privacy. That's not what this is about. Now, another great quote here came from Edward Snowden, and I really like this one as well. A lot of people say, arguing that you don't care about the right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. Even if you don't necessarily agree with me on such an extreme level, people want and need privacy, and I think this perfectly explains my view on this. Just because you don't feel like you have anything to hide right now, once you lose your privacy, you may have something in the future that you wish was still private and isn't. So always bear that in mind, always remember that. So for me, this is kind of my view on these things now. This is how I really look at this. And I think if we were to build the web today, would we not just encrypt everything by default? Right? Like, would we have this idea of unencrypted and encrypted communications? Because we talk all the time about, oh, this website needs encryption and this website doesn't, and that traffic needs encryption, and people can have different views on that. My view is like, you know what, if we just encrypt everything, then we can't forget anyone, and we can't disagree on who or what needs encryption. If we were to rebuild the web today, it would be 100% encrypted from the start. If there was like a web v2, we wouldn't even have the notion of HTTP traffic, of unencrypted traffic. So to me, what we're doing is not adding this new feature, we're not improving the web, we're fixing this bug in the original design, this lack of encryption. And this is genuinely how I feel about this. The lack of encryption on the web is a bug, and that's what we're doing, we're fixing it. So I want to say thank you very much for everyone that's coming. I have left a good 10 minutes here for some Q&A. I know I'm in Norway, I hope I get the Q&A, otherwise we're all going to have an extra 10 minutes on the coffee break. So thank you very much. So, questions? Okay, wow, yes.
Yeah, well, in the future, do you think we will see an increase in services like Let's Encrypt that offer free certificates to authorities and stuff?
Okay, so the question was, do I think in the future we'll see more organizations like Let's Encrypt that do free certificates and things like that? I think we're kind of already seeing that now. So, if you look at organizations like Cloudflare, who are a big CDN provider, I use them, so they've had their universal SSL offering, free certificates and installation. Other services like Akamai and Capsula do the same. If you're in AWS, you can get free certificates from ACM. If you're in GCP, you get free certificates. Like, free certificates are all around us now. So I do want to see more, absolutely, because we don't want a kind of single point of failure or vendor lock in any regard. But I do think that we will see more, yes, absolutely. Question?
What about the IoT devices when local network routers, stuff like that? It's usually either unencrypted or we generate the certificate of valid.
Okay, so another really good one there was, what about kind of local devices, IoT devices, or a router where you get your new router, you plug it in, and it's got a web interface to configure it? This is a really good one. This has been historically quite tricky, but me and a friend of mine he was working for a company that builds networking devices that have a web interface, and there are ways to do this. Yes, obviously there is a more in-depth technical implementation, but there is no reason that device cannot be provisioned with a certificate in order to have the secure UI on it. So what we need is vendors to pick up the slack. We can't keep having people get this router out the box and it's like a big red warning, not secure, you've got to go log in and do all this configuration stuff. It is more difficult, I agree. Like, there is work to be done, but it's not impossible. It can be done. We just need the vendors to do the work. And I think what we need for that is for the consumer demand to be there first. I can keep yelling at vendors and telling them to make their stuff better, but until the average consumer, their customer, the people giving them their money are saying, I want this thing, I don't think that we'll probably see that. Yes?
When we think about companies, ISPs, Kazakhstan,
So a really good question. What do I think about countries or governments or places like Kazakhstan terminating TLS? So for the people that may not know the backstory to that one, the Kazakh government decided that they were going to try and decrypt all of their citizens' traffic. So at their literal physical internet borders in Kazakhstan, they started intercepting connections and saying, you literally cannot go to this website because it's an encrypted website. What you have to do is download this certificate, which was the Kazakhstan government's root certificate for their CA, and you have to install it on your device. Now, if you take somebody else's root certificate and install it on your device, what it allows that person, that organization, that entity to do is intercept and decrypt all of your encrypted traffic. So you literally grab this one little certificate file from the government's website, install it, bam, everything that you do decrypted. And the Kazakh government tried to force this on all of its citizens by intercepting their connections and saying, basically, you can't go on the internet unless you install this thing. If you install it, we decrypt everything. If you don't install it, no internet. And that's like a pretty tough choice, because what are most people going to do? I mean, most people probably don't understand the ramifications of installing the certificate. But even if you did, and the choice is don't go on the internet ever again, I think that's super shady. Like, there's no other way for me to explain that. Ultimately, they failed because of a lot of backlash online. I guess the technical implementation of that must be a lot more difficult than they first anticipated. But I don't think that'll be the end of it either. And I don't think that will be the only government that tries it, nor the only way that they try to do it either. So I think we can expect to see more things like that in the future, unfortunately. More questions? No, are we all good? Oh yeah, one more, sorry.
So do you think that
Good on time.
the implementation of the new standard HTTP2 will force the implementation of SSL?
So that's
you can run HTTP2
without it, yeah. So that's a really good question. Will new standards like HTTP2 force the deployment of things like encryption? So from a technical standpoint, if you wanted to use HTTP2, there's no actual need to run that over an encrypted connection. The IETF was actually going to standardize that originally, but they buckled on that requirement and said you could do H2C, which is HTTP2 in the clear. However, all of the browser vendors only implemented H2 support on a secure connection. Now, HTTP2, the new version of the protocol, offers some incredibly significant performance advantages over HTTP 1.1. So by only supporting this on a secure connection, yes, they are basically trying to do exactly what you said, which is, I don't like to use the word force people. They are trying to encourage people to use a secure connection. But you can see most of the speed benefits of H2 here. So this is a website, if you've not seen it, http versus https.com. This is the HTTP page. It's trying to load 360 images as fast as possible. You can have a look at the source code. It's super, super basic. 360 images with cache busters on HTTP right now. And then if I go ahead and use HTTPS, because we now have a secure connection, we can use H2, the newer version of the protocol, which comes with things like connection multiplexing, which is why I can load this page so much faster. So people are chasing these kind of performance boosts, but if you want H2, you've got to have HTTPS up in the top left. This was a fantastic incentivization. Are we going to just keep yelling at people to do encryption and hitting them with the big stick and saying, you should be secure, you should be secure, or should we just take the stick and put the carrot on the end and hold the carrot in front of them with the stick? It's your choice. You can hit them with it or you can dangle the carrot. I think dangling the carrot is the better approach. Any more questions? No, okay, we're a few minutes early then, but that's everything for me. Thank you very much.